For literally hundreds of years, mankind has been fascinated with the one phenomena of the wilderness to take numerous forms and names. Depending on where you live, that name could be Sasquatch, Yeti, abominable snowman, or simply by the name given to it by most people, Bigfoot. It is the one mystery that continues to enthrall and capture the imagination of us all. But before we get into that, I'd like to take this time to ask you to please subscribe to this, my new channel, and also slap that notifications bell so that you'll be updated as and when new content is available. So now, with a blood-curdling howl, let's get into it. Following is an overview of some of the more famous cases and encounters with the entity that inspires many people to head out into the wild in search of their own answers. But I'll also be lifting the lid on possibly the most famous case of a Bigfoot encounter known to mankind. It's time for the great Bigfoot deception here on the flip side. Now, in many instances, tales from the indigenous peoples, such as the Athabascan Indians of the Kenai Peninsula in Alaska, or the Iroquois and Shawnee tribes of the Ohio Plains, to the Lepcha people who lived in the Himalayan regions of both India and Nepal. Now, each of these tribes have one eerie similarity. They all seem to have accounts of existing with the presence of an otherworldly being who bore numerous traits similar to those of the human form. Most of the entities, whether they were called the Nantinak, the Sasquatch or Yeti, all seem to be very large versions of mankind. Upright and bipedal, as in they walked on two legs, they tend to stand well in excess of the average height of the human species, which could account for the all too familiar accounts of the size of their feet. Now, while many of the historical encounters with these entities took place when eyewitnesses would not have any way of recording the encounter, and by that I mean personal cameras never really existed at the time when many of the earlier accounts in folklore came to be. Now, for us, I guess in the modern age, it's fortunate that these cryptids have continued to be encountered as time progresses, especially at times when many of us now travel with some form of camera or other recording device on our body. Now, one thing that's always been a bone of contention, especially with me, seeing as I'm a photographer, with regards to the quality of the footage and stills we see of encounters, they simply don't match up with the quality and clarity afforded by the current imaging technology of the time. I mean, in an age of multiple tens of megapixels and 4K and even 8K video, it's amazing how so many of the encounters in the modern age look like they've been shot with a baby monitor or a Brownie camera. But maybe, just maybe, that's the best way to prolong the intrigue of the entity we're so enamored with. Case in point, it's June 2001, and youth group leader Jim Mills is leading a group of young boys on an expedition on an annual backpacking trek through the Marble Mountains in the eastern Mojave Desert in San Bernardino, California. In what has since become the longest known uninterrupted video encounter with Bigfoot, it epitomizes the standard of imagery focusing on encounters with mankind's favorite cryptid. It's unfocused, it's shaky, as this video still quite clearly shows. Needless to say, it does nothing to promote the viability of the high-definition camera with which was used to film it. A majority of modern-day encounters seem to stem from the mainland US, but it's only fair to pay tribute to encounters in other geographical areas. One of the most famous photographs supposedly left by a Bigfoot or Yeti, as they are known in the Himalayas, is this one of a massive footprint in the snow. Photographed in 1951 by a British explorer by the name of Eric Earl Shipton. As years progressed, so did the interest in the Yeti, so much so to a point that in 2014 this photograph sold for a cool $5,000 in a public auction. Now, if there is another physiological trait other than the size of their feet, most Bigfoot encounters are swift to include the imposing size of the entity. However, this seems not to be the case in a 2007 encounter in the Pennsylvania's Allegheny National Park, when hunter Rick Jacobs left a trail camera that photographed what he suggested as being a Bigfoot. Now, mixed with the fact that this same camera also captured bear cubs at pretty much the same time, fans the flames of critics who suggest that this image actually is of a bear, possibly even a female bear, but with a severe case of mange, insofar that that accounts for the lack of volume and fur on the animal. Alas, it seems the feet have it, and in this photograph, photographed in 1980, it clearly shows it must have belonged to something pretty imposing. Measuring at some 17 3/4 inches in length, this footprint was left in the mud of a wooded area close to Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and was discovered at a time when locals had reported other traits known to accompany Bigfoot sightings, these being namely noises that were emanating from dark wooden areas, as well as an unexplained and unusually pungent smell. Now, while there is no definitive proof of a species described by science that would allow us to categorically identify these creatures, it seems that we, mankind, has a deep and increasing fascination with whatever may be lurking in the forests and mountains of the world. But it also goes without saying that as wild spaces shrink with the incessant depletion of the wilderness, it would suggest that encounters would increase as years progress. Now, without a shadow of a doubt, the most famous of all imagery sequences recorded of Bigfoot was that shot on a roll of film in 1967 by Roger Patterson and his expedition partner Bob Gimlin. Now, the one aspect of the sequence is the gait of the Bigfoot recorded in the shaky video, and after examination by supposed doctors and scientists, it would suggestion that the gait, or the way in which the subject walked, would be incredibly difficult for a human to replicate. Now, many films of subsequent encounters all seem to show the entity being filmed as walking in the same way as had been filmed in the Patterson film. This in turn then suggests that some, maybe more, of these encounters were elaborately yet amazingly well choreographed hoaxes. And why would I say that? Now, according to Roger Patterson, who has sadly since passed away from cancer in 1972, his account was that he and his travelling partner and personal friend Bob Gimlin were riding horses on October the 20th, 1967, in a region known as Bluff Creek in California. The men were explicitly on a trek to try and find and film a Bigfoot creature, given that Patterson was at that time in the process of creating a documentary on that very subject. Now, maybe for many people it seems just a little bit too perfect for a Bigfoot right on cue to step out of the woods exactly when and where they were riding their horses. Now, in fright, apparently Patterson's horse reared and threw its rider to the ground, who then got up, managed to grab a film camera from the saddlebags of the horse where it was being transported, and then Patterson was able to hand crank the video camera as he ran towards the creature, eventually stopping to rest against a tree in order to stabilize the footage a little and continue filming. Now, once they had all of the footage they were going to get, because the Bigfoot had legged it off into the woods, Patterson and Gimlin set about making plaster casts of the footprints left by the Bigfoot, and the rest, as they say, is history. However, according to a man named Clyde Ranke, who used to work as an office manager for a film company named American National Enterprises, aka ANE, a film company that specialized in wildlife content, he had first-hand accounts of the story being fake. Ranke is on record as stating that Patterson was indeed on the payroll of ANE as a self-described wildlife cameraman and photographer. He also went on to say that Patterson was a very willing partner in the planning of what would be one of the most elaborate Bigfoot hoaxes known to man. Now, they set out to create what was called a filler or a loss leader segment, which was a short film to be played between two other features that would then be incorporated into a matinee content. It was quite a popular and widespread trend for Western parents in the 60s and 70s to leave their children at cinema theatres on Saturday mornings while they could busy themselves with household chores, or indeed while they went out shopping. Now, as part of these feature sets, there would be cartoons, an adventure series and a feature film. And these complete morning programs were thus called matinees. And many a child, including yours truly, attended such screenings way back when in year dot. And this lost leader was supposed to be slotted in amongst those the content of these matinees, which would then be marketed with great fanfare. Come and see the latest Bigfoot footage. So in order to create interest and fill cinema seats. And that's exactly what it did. Now, accomplishing what it set out to do, the footage of the encounter literally went viral. It could have been the first ever viral video in history, which basically means that it increased attendance at any of the cinemas in which it was shown. Now, as a byproduct of that increase in attendance, the financial rewards were also highly positive and welcomed by all concerned. Maybe not all. The world was about to come crashing down around Patterson and the film company. Now, airing on Fox TV on December 28, 1998, and as part of the World's Greatest Hoax series, or Secrets Finally Revealed documentaries, it started with the revelations by Renke that all was not seamed with the footage. This would be further shored up by one man who was watching the programme, Bob Hieronymus, who, as a retired labourer, turned out to be the person who was wearing an elaborate Bigfoot disguise in the Patterson footage. Hieronymus recounted that it was Patterson who first asked him to don the suit and walk around in the woods while Patterson filmed him. Now, at the time, he was only 26 and being offered an initial $1,000, as well as promised royalties from the film that both Patterson and Gimlin promised would be very lucrative. Hieronymus obviously agreed. $1,000 back then was a lot of money back in the day. Now, yet, despite keeping his part of the agreement, Bob always states that he never received 1 red cent for all of his endeavours and involvement in this project. But what about that gait? What about the way the Bigfoot walked in the Patterson film being totally unique? Well, cue Hieronymus' 8-year-old cousin John Miller. As Bob had the costume in his house prior to being filmed, it was soon discovered by the prying eyes of an adventurous and naturally curious youngster at play. Remembering one particular day when he saw the suit in the trunk of Bob's car, John Miller recounted the following. "I can remember finding the head to the suit. I just picked it up and started playing with it. And naturally, I put it right on. And boy, did it stink. I can remember going up to different people's porches and wondering if they could see me, and if they could, would I be scaring them?" When asked about the inhuman way the walk of the creature documented in the Patterson filming many years later, Miller also went on to say, "I can tell you what, if you've ever watched that Patterson film sequence and watched just how the creature walks, and then if Bob was sat right next to you and you asked him to get up and walk across the road, you would see, judging side by side, that both of those entities, the Bigfoot on the film and Bob, walked exactly identical. I used to get such a kick out of watching that." Now, sealing the deal on Patterson as having staged the footage was the corroboration by Hieronymus' mother, Opal. Bob wasn't tremendously paid as a young labourer, and would often use his mother's car to get around from work appointments. Now, a few days after the filming, when he had a day off, Bob was resting in the house, but his mother wanted to go shopping. Now, on part of her errands, she would also be returning some bottles to the local bottle store. And at that time, when you did return bottles, you would get a couple of cents per returned bottle. Upon opening the trunk of her car, she saw what she immediately thought to be a dead animal. But on closer inspection, given the lack of odour that would have indicated the presence of a dead animal, Opal took a closer look and realised that she was looking at some form of costume. And she went on to say, "After I saw it, I looked around in case I could have asked someone to help me remove the animal, whichever it was. I then discovered it was a suit of some kind, but the way that head was just laying there, looking at me, it sent shivers down my spine." Sadly, a whole plethora of additional characters subsequently came out of the woodwork and identified themselves as having had roles in this escapade. From film colourists who once worked at A&E and who were charged with colouring the film to make it look particularly authentic, through to additional members of Hieronymus' family, both near and far. Also, a man by the name of Philip Morris also came forward as the person who had actually made the costume that Bob Hieronymus would end up wearing. It was basically a gorilla costume, but unlike the standard black colour that was normal in the day, his was tinged more with lighter browns and a fawn colour. The suit had also been tailored in a few ways specific to the demands made by Patterson. One aspect was the request from Patterson for more of the Dynel fur material that was used in the design to help cover up the zipper of the costume that ran down the full middle of the back of the wearer. Now, over the years, numerous other elements and aspects of the footage have been placed under the microscope and theorized upon by numerous investigators, scientists and Bigfoot specialists, as well as ardent fans. Sadly, it seems we're still waiting to get that one absolute and categorically damning evidence that something really is choosing the backyards, mountains and forests of the world as a refuge from the advances of mankind. Now, as mentioned, as these spaces and places become a dwindling resource, I'm personally, with bated breath, waiting for that time when a real-life Sasquatch, Yeti or Bigfoot is finally recorded for scientific classification. And how about you? What do you think? Do you think that day is coming? Let me know in the comments below. So there you have it, folks. A number of Bigfoot encounters over the years, with probably the most famous of all, sadly, being debunked as an elaborate hoax. Now, does or should that therefore cast doubt on the rest? Well, I'll let you be the judge of that. But it is good to hold on to some sense of there being something unknown out there awaiting for discovery. Don't you think? Now, I'll apologise in advance if I'm bursting any bubbles for any guys and girls out there, but sadly, these things happen. Now, as mentioned at the beginning of the film, if you've enjoyed this content, I'd appreciate if you could subscribe to the channel. Throw a rock at that notifications bell so you'll be notified as and when new content is available from yours truly. But until then, please stay safe, stay well, and I look forward to the time when I can see you again here on the flip side.